Welcome to Threads of Time, where stories breathe from the depths of history and live in hearts from one generation to the next. Today we tell the story of a woman who waited 25 years. Not the kind of waiting where you sit by the window counting days, but the kind where you build an entire life with your own hands and keep one door in your heart slightly open. And when the one she waited for finally came back and knocked on that door, she did what no one expected. She did not open it. So come with us as we follow this story to its very end. In a coastal city where the sound of the sea found its way into every home through every crack in every wall, there lived a woman named Fatima. She was not the kind of woman who drew attention with loud beauty or endless conversation. She was quiet in the way of someone who weighs every word before letting it leave her mouth, and in her eyes there was always something that made whoever looked at her feel she was seeing more than she showed. She married at 22 years old to a man named Jassim, a young ambitious merchant who worked in sea trade, carrying goods between ports across the water. Jassim was the kind of man who filled a room just by walking into it. He laughed loudly, spoke with the energy of someone who could already see the future clearly in front of him, and Fatima would watch him with that quiet question always sitting behind her eyes that she never said out loud. In their first year of marriage, Fatima gave birth to a son they named Rashed. Jassim's happiness was enormous. He would carry the boy and walk through the house laughing, and Fatima would watch all of this with warm eyes. But 1 month after Rashed was born, Fatima began to notice something. Jassim was changing slowly. He came home later. He spoke less. He sat alone, sometimes staring at something she could not see. When she asked, he said he was tired from work. When she asked again, he gave the same answer. And when she asked a third time, he looked at her for a long moment and said nothing. And Fatima understood that there was something he did not want to say. On a cold night that winter, while Rashed was sleeping and Fatima sat alone sewing, Jassim came in and sat across from her and said in a low, serious voice, "Fatima, I cannot stay here." The sentence was simple, but it was heavier than anything she had ever heard. She said, without lifting her eyes from her sewing, "Where are you going?" He said, "There is land far in the north, they say is fertile and untouched. I want to go and build something new." She said, "And when will you return?" He said, "1 year? Maybe less?" She said, "And Rashed?" He said, "You will take care of him until I come back?" "You can do it." In the early morning, Jassim left. He picked up his bag, said a few words to Fatima, touched the face of the sleeping, Rashed with the tips of his fingers, and walked out the door. Fatima stood at the window and watched him walk until he disappeared at the end of the road. Then she looked at Rashed sleeping. Then she looked at the ceiling. And she did not cry. Fatima waited 1 full year. No letter came. She waited a 2nd year. No news came. In the 3rd year, she sent a man she knew to search for Jassim in the area he had mentioned. The man came back after months and said in a voice that avoided her eyes, "No one knows Jassim there. It is as if he never went there at all." Fatima looked at the man with unreadable eyes and said quietly, "Thank you." And she closed the door. That night, Fatima sat alone after Rashed fell asleep and thought in her way that no one else knew, calmly and without tears and without screaming. She thought through every possibility. Maybe he died on the road. Maybe he got lost. Maybe he chose to disappear. And in all of these possibilities, there was one thing that did not change. She was alone now with a 3-year-old child and not enough money and no family in this city. She made one decision that night. She would go back to the sea, not to visit and not for a walk. She kept her small house by the sea, and she kept Rashed in it, and she began working as a seamstress to run the house. She worked with the quiet precision of someone who is not working because she has no choice, but because this is what she knows how to do well. Rashed grew up in that house. He grew up on the sound of sewing in the morning and the smell of food in the evening, and a mother who asked him every day about his day and actually listened. And when he asked about his father, Fatima would say in a voice with no bitterness and no self-pity, Your father was a man who went looking for something and could not find his way back. Rasht asked once when he was 10 years old, "Do you hate him?" Fatima said no. He said, "Why not?" She said, "Because hate takes energy that I need for more important things." In the 10th year of Jassim's absence, a man came and asked to marry Fatima. He was a kind widower who knew her story and said he would accept Rasht as his own son. Fatima sat with herself for days, thinking. Then she apologized and declined. When her brother asked why she refused, she said, "Because I do not know what I feel about Jassim, and I will not build on top of something I do not understand." Her brother said, "But he left you." She said, "Yes, but my heart has not made its decision yet, and when it does, I will know." 15 years passed, then 20. Rasht had grown up and married and had children of his own and built his house next to his mother's house. He came to her almost every day, and the relationship between them was the kind that does not need many words. They would sit and drink tea and sometimes barely speak, and that was enough. And Fatima had reached 47 years old. Not much changed in her way, but in her face, the lines of time that she neither hid nor showed, making her look like a book that has been read many times and still holds its shape. And in the 25th year of Jassim's absence, on an ordinary evening while Fatima sat sewing by the window and the sound of the sea came from far away, she heard a knock at the door. It was not Rashid's knock, because she knew Rashid's knock. This was different, slower and heavier, the knock of someone who hesitated before raising his hand. She put the sewing aside and stood slowly and walked to the door. She stood in front of it for a moment, then said in a quiet voice, "Who is it?" The voice came from outside, older than she remembered and carrying something that sounded like long exhaustion. "It is Jassim." Fatima stood in front of the closed door. She did not open it. She did not move. She said in that same quiet voice, "What do you want?" Silence from outside, and then he said, "I want to see you. I want to explain." She said, 25 years, Jassim." He said, "I know." She said, "Rasht grew up and married and became a father, and you never saw him." He said in a voice that carried something like a slow collapse, "I know." She said, "And what do you want now?" He said, "I do not know. Maybe I just want you to listen to me." Fatima was silent for a long time with the door between them. In that silence was all 25 years. Every morning she woke up alone. Every night she heard Rasht ask about his father. Every season that passed while she completed it by herself. Every decision she made without anyone else there to share it. Then she said, "I will not open the door tonight, Jassim." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because a door that opens after 25 years needs to open at the right time and from the inside. And today I was not ready." She heard his footsteps moving away slowly, then silence. Fatima sat in the room for a long time after that. She did not call Rasht, and she did not tell anyone. She just sat with the sewing on the table and the window open and the sea sending its voice from far away. And she sat there until dawn came. In the morning she sent for Rasht. When he came and sat across from her, she said in a steady voice, "Your father came last night." Rasht looked at her with eyes that held many things he could not name all at once. He said, "Where is he?" She said, "I do not know." He said, "Why did you not tell me then?" She said, "Because I wanted to think first before you thought." Rasht said, "And what did you decide?" She said, "I decided I will listen to him once. Not for him, for you." Rasht found his father in a small inn near the harbor. Jassim was a man in his 60s now, his hair completely white and in his face the weight of years that made him look older than he was. When he saw Rasht, he stood and stared at him for a long time. Rasht, who he had left as a baby in a cradle and who stood before him now as a complete man. Jassim did not speak. His eyes just filled with something that had no exact name. And Rasht looked at him with Fatima's eyes exactly, those eyes that see more than they show. Then Rasht said quietly, "Come." Jassim came to Fatima's house the second morning. She opened the door this time. They stood facing each other for the first time in 25 years. In that standing was what words are not enough for. Fatima looked at him with eyes that had not changed much and still holding that thing that was always in them, something that asks without speaking. Then she said, "Come in." They sat in the room she had lived in for 25 years, and Jassim said, "I want to explain." She said, "Explain." And Jassim spoke. He spoke about that distant city and about another woman he had met and about a moment of weakness that became an entire lifetime. He spoke about the children he had there, and then about the wife who died 2 years ago, and about children who grew up and no longer needed him, and about finding himself alone in a city where he had no one and deciding to come back,